Hello, I'm Kathy Good, and I'm the director of the Family Caregivers Center of Mercy. And today I would like to talk with you about how the center came to be and what we do here to support family caregivers. So in 2014, Tim Charles, who is the president and CEO of Mercy Medical Center, was in Mount Kisco, New York at Northern Westchester Hospital when he saw the Ken Hamilton Caregiver Center. And before he came home, he had a tour and he learned that Marion Hamilton had created that center in honor and memory of her husband, Ken, who died of lung cancer. And in the process of his treatment, they had been in 5 different hospitals. And while she felt like she had great family and friend support, she often felt alone and overwhelmed. And so after he died, she created that center in honor and memory of him so that caregivers whose loved ones were being treated in that hospital would have a physical space to be and someone who would be concerned about meeting their needs. Well, Tim Charles thought that that was an awesome concept because at the time and continuing till today, he is concerned about the number of people that are going to be diagnosed and living with dementia. And he feels that the medical community is just not prepared to provide for them. So he thought, wow, if the Cedar Rapids area had a family caregiver center, then at least those caregivers who were caring long-term for people living with dementia would have a physical place to be and someone to support them. And so it was on that kind of basis then that he decided to reach out to me. And he knew me from in several ways. Dave, my husband, was diagnosed with the visual variant of dementia, Alzheimer's disease. Actually, in 2003, he was 56. And he lived at home for 8 years. And during those 8 years, I served on the local Alzheimer's board with Tim's wife, Janice. And so Tim had kind of watched from afar as I had cared for Dave. And after 8 years at home, Dave wrenched his back and he went for rehab, and I thought he would return home. But in his absence, I realized what I'd been doing and knew that I just could not continue to do that without going down the tubes myself. And so Dave went to live at Halmar, which is a senior living community within the Mercy Medical Center. And so Tim came to learn about me from a different perspective because as a volunteer, I decided to take on an art project and put new art, 103 pieces of new art on the walls of the 2 floors of Halmar. And so I think Tim learned that I could do something from nothing. And then the other thing that he knew about me was that at the end of 2013, I had retired from my clinical social work practice. And so when he talked with me in 2014, I think he thought I didn't have anything to do. So he came to me to say, did I have any interest in helping Mercy explore the possibility of creating a family caregiver center? And when he asked me that question, I said, oh, absolutely, because while Dave was at home, those 8 years, I had created what I called my committee. I'd figured out what our needs were. I figured out what resources were in the community. I accessed those resources, I put them together, and I ran my committee. And by this time, I had been a social worker in the Cedar Rapids area for decades, and I found that to be a very daunting task. And so I used to ask myself, what do people do who do not have decades of social work experience when they're facing this role as a caregiver? So when Tim asked that question, did I have any interest in helping the hospital explore that possibility of a caregiver center, I thought, there's my answer. And so I immediately said, yes, we can create a caregiver center. We can help family caregivers figure out what their needs are, provide them emotional support, and connect them with community resources. So we were off and running. So we brought the people from Mount Kisco, New York here to Cedar Rapids. We kind of picked their brains and we figured out and determined that they had what we're calling a hospital-based model, we decided that we wanted to have a community focused model. And so following our talking with the Mount Kisco people, we held focus groups with caregivers, medical personnel, community human service organizations. And then at the end of 2014, at the beginning of 2015, the Mercy Medical Foundation commissioned a feasibility study, which meant that they hired a group in Chicago, and a couple of men came to Cedar Rapids and interviewed community leaders to determine if there was interest and support for the creation of a family caregiver center, and if those community leaders thought that the foundation could raise $2.5 million to endow the center to ensure that then it would be open and accessible to everyone in the community and would become a community resource. So that report came back positive on March 9th of 2015, at which point the foundation board voted unanimously to leap into the fundraising initiative. And at that moment, then we went from exploring the possibility of having a family caregiver center to saying, I think we're going to have one. And so then a couple of other interesting things happened that I think allowed us to move along faster than sometimes people do in this kind of a situation, or organizations do. We took our concept first to Startup CR Weekend, that's for entrepreneurial types. We presented our information, we worked all weekend, we developed our concept, we presented it to a panel of judges at the end of the weekend, and earned tuition to Venture School. That's a University of Iowa John Papajohn Entrepreneurial Center program for startups. And so we took our concept to Venture School. It's based on customer discovery interviews. During the course of that 6 weeks of Venture School, we interviewed about 100 caregivers on what they saw as their needs. And as soon as we started seeing a similarity in the needs that they presented to us, we started talking with them about the concept that we were looking to offer them in terms of services at the Family Caregiver Center. And 68% of them said yes, that they would be interested in the services that then we were proposing to be offered through the Family Caregiver Center. So I tell that story so that you can understand that when I talk about the services that we are now providing at the Caregiver Center, that you will know that this has come through a very vetted process to come up with what it is that we're doing. So I thought that the way that I would offer you the information about what we're doing is to give you a little tour of the center. So what's in front of you obviously is our main entrance, and you can see down the hall. But the next place that I want to show you is something that we call the Family Caregivers Lounge. Currently, because of COVID, we have repositioned some of the furniture in there so that we're socially distant. But one of the main things that we use that room for is to do one-on-one visits with family caregivers. And that's where we would talk with the family about what their needs are, and provide them that emotional support that I mentioned earlier. And then we would talk about the community resources that might be available to them, or resources here at the center. The next room that I'm going to show you is for our volunteers, because we are volunteer led and run. And 99% of the volunteers that we have here, I think we've had about 157 volunteers now involved in our program since we started 5 years ago. And they've had, most of them either are currently caregivers or have had caregiving experience. And they assist us in a whole variety of ways. And so when they're in the office, sometimes they're in that room doing things like stuffing brochures or doing data entry. So the next slide shows you our resource lending library. It contains three kinds of resources. One is it contains books about the chronic conditions that caregivers, the people that caregivers are caring for, are living with. And I want to point out that our Caregivers Center supports caregivers who are dealing with adults with all kinds of chronic conditions, including dementia. So there would be a variety of types of books here. So secondly, it has books about the caregiving process itself. And thirdly, about grief and loss, because inherent in long-term caregiving, of course, is grief and loss. So the next slide shows you the community room. And this is where we offer all kinds of educational events, and our support groups meet when they can meet in person. Currently, because of COVID, we're of course meeting by Zoom. But I think over the course of the last 5 years that the center has been in existence, we've offered 1,200 or so educational sessions that would include variety of topics, of course, of which caregivers might be interested. That would include art, some music experiences, some chair yoga. I don't know if you can see it here, but our tables are on wheels, and so we're always rearranging the community room so that it meets the needs that we have when caregivers meet for the variety of services that we provide them. And the next slide shows you the hospitality lounge. It's important to us if a caregiver is going to come here either for a one-on-one session or for one of the educational opportunities that we're providing, or for art or music or chair yoga, that they have the opportunity to bring their person with them. And if that person doesn't want to participate, or maybe the caregiver doesn't want them to participate, they can be in our hospitality lounge. You can see that the door has a glass in it, and there's a screen so that we can make sure that if there needs to be a video in and we need to turn up the volume, we can close the door, but we can have a view of what is happening in that room. And last but not least, this is the office for our center manager. As I said earlier, the center is really volunteer led and run, but we have two paid employees. One is our office manager, and the second is the center manager, who lives in this office and handles all the day-to-day operations of the center. And last but not least is my office, looking kind of cluttered with paper, because it usually is, because I have a lot going on. And I kind of have my thumb up because I love being in this position as the director of the Family Caregiver Center. And I would welcome anybody who is watching this to contact us. The contact information is there on the screen. Thank you so much for listening to how the Family Caregiver Center came to be and what it is that we do here.